On this edition of Independent Sources, out in the cold, thousands of Hurricane Sandy victims may be left homeless as the deadlines for state and federal hotel housing programs draw near.
And Parlez-vous français? French dual language programs are on the rise in New York City public schools.
Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Diana Ravinka.
And I'm Gary Pierre. The images during and after Hurricane Sandy were like something out of a special effects-laden, big-budget Hollywood disaster film. Chunks of piers and cars were being washed away. Stories of giant waves cresting at over 30 feet and crashing into homes.
Now, though less frenetic, they're still full of feeling. Sad children huddled with parents and tired parents asking where they're going to live next.
That's the dilemma for more than 2,000 Hurricane Sandy victims who have been housed in hotels since last November through programs funded by the city and FEMA. The programs are scheduled to end on May 15th and 29th respectively, leaving many of these families without any real options for short or long-term housing.
I spoke with Gotham Gazette reporter Chester Soria about the future for these people and the real possibility of some of them ending up homeless. Chester, let's start with the city's hotel program for Sandy evacuees. Tell us what are the latest numbers? How many of the initial number of people in the program are still living in hotels?
Out of the about 1,200 people that started in the Sandy hotel program at the end of November, at the beginning of November, right after Sandy hit, there were more than 1,200 Sandy evacuees in the hotels that city paid for. Of those, right now there are about 365 individuals who are still in the hotels and are trying to figure out what their next move is going to be. There are about 600 New Yorkers who are staying on the program until the end of May regardless because they've had some sort of situation lined up for them after that day, whether it be moving back into their homes after they've been fixed or they have received public housing assistance.
But for a few hundreds of these people, the deadline to move out is May 15th as of now. What's the likelihood of that deadline being moved further since there's no solution in sight for these people?
It's unclear exactly how much longer they'll have past the 15th. It's going to be up to a judge. The two sides had a hearing in court last week where they basically brought up this restraining order against the evictions. There are 5 evacuees who are being represented by Legal Aid Society, and their argument is that the city has placed an arbitrary deadline for these residents to move out, being at that point before the 15th, it was at the end of April. Again, these are more than 300 people who don't have any housing situation lined up, and the cities say that they either should be able to move back with their families, make their own arrangements, or if push comes to shove, into the shelter system itself, which is, as many critics say, it's already overrun by a lot too many. There's way much of a wait time for the shelter system.
Are these people mostly renters?
A lot of them are renters. Most of them are renters, and it's a diverse group of people from different parts of the city. There are many people. I would say most people are actually from Far Rockaways, and a couple people from Staten Island. Within that group, you also have about 4 families, if I remember correctly, that are undocumented families. So there's still, it's a very diverse group of people, but they all have the same need, and that's figuring out what they're going to do after the 15th.
What's the mood amongst them? There have been reports of sheer panic.
Panic is one word. There's also frustration and anger. There's during the hearing that they had about 2 weeks ago now, there was a large group of people who had a rally before in front of City Hall. And the mood was very tense. It was very frustrated. People were there with their families and their babies and trying to basically get an extension from the city. It's worry. Well, there's a lot of these people that are still there. There are about 48 families still in the housing program, and they're about to be, they don't have any options after the 15th lined up. So they're trying to figure out what they can do with their children and older relatives if they have them.
As a reporter, you've followed a few of these families. Tell us about life in hotels. It's not as glamorous as one may think.
Right. I spoke to this one woman from the Rockaways, Sherelle, and she has a family of four, 3 older children, but one young 7-year-old. And the way she describes her situation is that it's not a vacation. This isn't just because they're at a hotel doesn't mean this is relaxing for them. She says that she gets out of the hotel about 7 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, and doesn't come back until 6 in the evening because she's looking for work and she's looking for housing options for her family. The message that she wanted to make clear when I talked to her was that, again, this isn't a vacation. They're not just laying about in a hotel watching TV. They're actively trying to find living situations that work for them and for their children and their families.
You've mentioned that the prospect of homeless shelters accepting these people is not necessarily a real one because homeless shelters are bursting at the seams right now. What's going to happen with these people in the end?
Well, and that's part of what the next court hearing on May 15th will sort of address. One of the things that's interesting about this whole situation is that the city agency that's sort of taking charge of the situation has been the Department of Homeless Services. And so Seth Diamond, who's the commissioner for the department, has said very publicly that he doesn't want these people to have to rely on homeless services. Ideally they'd be able to set them up in different situations that don't rely on them. In the sort of desperate situation that a lot of people in homeless services currently rely on. Whether or not they actually end up going back in, there's very low numbers right now of people who have actually left the hotel program already before the deadline and gone into homeless services, but they definitely don't want to have a sudden rush of people, these hundreds of people in the homeless services program. They're also suggesting that if they can't, like I mentioned earlier, if they can't get into homeless services, they'd rather not be in homeless services, that they move in with their family members that they have any in the city. The problem there is that anybody who still has family in the city, their own families they could easily have tight situations too. It's not like we're at the luxury of space in a lot of apartments in New York City.
There's also been in the press this idea that the city officials were circulating saying that people in the hotel program who don't have yet a place to go, some of them have refused public housing. Tell us about that.
That's true. About, I think it was 71 families, or households, I should say, that have declined taking any services from the city. The question there is why. A lot of the people who have so far declined for these services, allegedly it's because the homes that they were showed were inadequate for them, or they were able to line up their own housing situations, whether again be moving in families. The commissioner during a hearing of the city council wasn't able to really explain where these 71 people who have refused help or allegedly refused help are actually going. But like I said, the whole idea is that they have either something lined up or they just didn't want to deal with the city.
What sort of inadequate conditions were they citing?
Well, during the council hearing, there were many Sandy evacuees who spoke, and a couple of them were talking about their particular situations. There was one man who said he was told by the city that his time was up and that he should move back into his apartment, but when he got to his apartment, he realized the repairs were actually incomplete. They still had mold, and he couldn't live there anymore because there's a lot of complaints about people getting sick over the mold from Sandy still. There's one woman who said that she was shown an illegal boarding home, a 3/4 home, as an option, which bunk beds in this very small situation, and the city by law isn't allowed to show these type of boarding homes to people who ask for help. The problem, I think, at the center of this is a miscommunication between what the city says it's doing and what the residents are complaining about the caseworkers that have been brought on to help bring evacuees into more permanent, stable housing situations.
Advocates for the homeless, as well as some city officials, are saying that there should be an effective response put in place for the next storm to come. Are you hearing anything in that direction?
Not so much on this issue. Last week, the city did come out with its after action plan, And if anything, most of that report had to deal with in preparation of how the city itself will address, flood zones and expanding those flood zones. And so far, there hasn't been a lot of talk about what to do with non-homeowner New Yorkers, meaning residents like the people in hotels, who were more often than not, they were renters. And that's an ongoing discussion still going on with just Sandy recovery in general, is how to prepare for the next storm in terms of home insurance and renters insurance, and how to treat these two different groups.
Chester Soria, thank you for being in studio with us today.
Thank you.
Still to come on the show, the push for more dual-language French programs in New York City public schools bears fruit.
Before that, Abby Shola has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic and community media. Chinese elders in South Brooklyn have become the target for what authorities are calling blessing scams. World Journal reports that many elderly Chinese women have been approached by strangers who convince them to put all of their valuable assets in a black bag to have a priest bless them to prevent impending danger. The con artist then switches the bags with one full of rubbish. One woman lost $70,000 of her assets. Community Board 15, along with the Brooklyn DA's office and others, recently held an information session urging people to beware. From the Forward, one man has launched a petition to boycott the upcoming Celebrate Israel parade because gays and lesbians are allowed to march. Avi Goldstein, an Orthodox activist based in Long Island, says LGBT groups' participation would compromise the moral integrity of the parade. But his efforts seem to be in vain since he has little support on the matter. In a letter, Goldstein admitted that a group of Jewish day school principals agreed not to object to gays marching in the parade. One Jewish queer youth organization is expecting 150 people to represent the community in the march. This is the second year gays and lesbian groups are participating in the event, which is to be held on June 2nd. Latino residents in Jackson Heights and Corona, Queens, say the next Queens Borough president they elect needs to improve street safety and public transportation above all other issues. El Diario spoke to many residents in the Queens neighborhoods who voiced their concerns about frequent robberies of mainly electronics such as cell phones and tablets. Many say the gangs in the area are taking advantage of people in the streets, at local businesses, and at train stations. Residents also complain that public transportation is too limited in the area, with both buses and trains overly packed during rush hour. In more news from Jackson Heights and Corona, Queens, food cart vendors operating in those areas have elected to join a pilot project to keep the streets and sidewalks clean. The project calls for street vendors to clean up to a 20-foot radius around their carts and provide trash cans, according to Queens Chronicle. Councilman Daniel Drum and Vamos Unidos, a nonprofit organization advocating for street vendors, launched the project on April 23rd. And finally, one clothing store has been labeled insensitive after releasing a fashion photo shoot taken in the post-Hurricane Sandy Rockaways. The company, Brooklyn Industries, recently released its summer collection called Rockaway Revisited, claiming that the area had been a source of inspiration in the personal lives of many of its employees. Willie Simpson, a reporter from Sheepshead Bites, points out that the photos were awkwardly taken against the backdrop of parts of the Rockaways that still remains in shambles. The company has no plans to donate any of the earnings from the collection to Sandy victims. Those were just a few stories from New York's ethnic and community media. Independent Sources will be back right after this.
In the last 5 years, there's been a real push for French dual language programs at elementary schools in New York City's public school system.
The first program began at PS 58 in Brooklyn with 8 students. When the new semester begins in September, an estimated 1,000 students will be enrolled in programs all over the city.
We'll talk to the principal at MS 256, Jeffrey Pearl, about how the programs are moving from the elementary to middle school level.
Before that, we'll hear more about the emergence of these French dual language programs in this report from Sarah Pizon.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Counting, singing, and exchanging. Pascal Sedbon finds that this is the best way to teach French to these 3- and 4-year-olds at her kindergarten in Boerum Hill. Sedbon is a French immigrant who moved to Brooklyn more than 10 years ago with her 2 children. She felt there was something missing for French parents who wanted to put their toddlers into the American school system. So she created the Language and Laughter Studio.
We had to fit in, which was already a big challenge, but at the same time keep our custom, culture, and language alive.
Eventually, what started as a program for only French speakers quickly gained the attention of American parents. Her school now welcomes over 70 children, both French and non-French speakers.
I think it's a real revolution. There's a huge enthusiasm from the American community and from the French community towards those programs, which is politically, economically, and socially an amazing trend.
A trend that's persisting. Some say in part because learning multiple languages will help these children compete in the emerging global economy that will require them to deal with people from all over the world. Parents like Talcott Camp understand that. She is a member of Éducation Française in New York, a parent association that promotes French as a second language. She is among the many American parents that have helped set up the 4 elementary public schools currently featuring French dual language programs. She says the push is also due to economics.
Families can't pay for the lycée, they can't get into the lycée even if they could pay for it because there's a very limited number of spots. And many parents want to be part of New York City's public school community.
There are more than 127,000 French speakers in New York City, but the recession has affected the Francophone immigrant population. While prior French immigrants were mostly expats, most French immigrants today cannot afford the $27,000 yearly tuition for the French lycée.
It's a different population as well, with different means, so there is a socioeconomic factor that push people towards public schools.
The rising demand for French dual languages in New York City is attracting the attention of the French government. Hélène Conway-Moret, the minister delegate for French nationals abroad, recently visited PS 58 in Carroll Gardens, the first New York public school to feature a French dual language program at the elementary level since 2007.
Ils ont des grosses jambes, regarde. L'autruche, le cheval. You see, after a year, you always need to kind of look back and see what worked, what didn't work, what we can improve, and see if indeed we got it right. Obviously, for this school, it's very good. It's excellent, and maybe it can serve as a model for the rest.
Students at PS 58 alternate between English and French each day of the week. The teachers put a big emphasis on reading. The goal is to make the students equally proficient in English and French by the time they leave the 5th grade. But the emphasis isn't just on kindergarten through 5th grade. 2 new middle school programs are set to open next fall. One in Park Slope at MS 51 and the other one here behind me at MS 256 on the Upper West Side. But there's concern that as these programs reach middle schools, the expectations and the risks of failure become greater.
In grade school, one teacher can teach all of the subjects. So when you get to middle school, you have to have a teacher who's certified for that material and be bilingual. So that's the trick.
And it happened in the past, and some schools have started a program and then gave up a few years later because it was too demanding, too challenging, or they didn't find the right people to take care of it. So yes, there are failures. Unfortunately, there are failures, yeah.
Despite those failures, there's still a rising demand for the limited spots in public schools. The EFNY and the French Embassy continue to collaborate in the hopes of doubling the availability of French dual language programs in New York City. For Independent Sources, I'm Sarah Pizon.
Jeffrey, your school, MS 256, I believe, is the school that Sarah mentioned as one of the schools that in the fall will start a dual language program. Tell us more about it.
Well, we are one of the two schools that was mentioned. One of the elementary schools that was mentioned, PS 84, which is actually one block away from where we're located, we're expecting them to be our primary feeder school because their students are finishing, their first class is finishing the 5th grade, and they've been taking French dual language instruction for 6 years, kindergarten through 5th grade, the majority of them. And their parent population was very concerned about having an opportunity to continue the program. So they reached out to the Department of Education, and the DOE reached out to me and asked if we would be interested in expanding their program to our school. And I personally did a little research on dual language instruction and thought it would be an incredible opportunity because, like we just saw, it really is important that to prepare students to function in a global.
Now tell us exactly how does a dual language education functions? How does it work?
Well, there are a number of different models. Our model is working on a 50-50 approach. So students in the French dual language program at MS 256 will receive 50% of their instruction over the course of the school year in French and 50% in English.
So that means they'll be taking math and science and French and English, essentially.
Well, it really depends on the staffing. If it turns out, it doesn't mean that, say, on like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, like their instruction will be in French, and on Tuesday, Thursday, it'll be in English, and then one day it'll switch. What it means is that it might be that all of their math instruction is in French for the entire year, because if the teacher we have who speaks French fluently and is certified has a strong background in math, then we would do that. So it's just making sure that over the course of the year, 50% of the instruction is in French and 50% is in English. Obviously, their English language arts class is going to be in English because they still have, that can't be taught in French because it's English language arts. And their French language arts class, which they'll be required to take, will be taught exclusively in French.
Okay. Now, you mentioned twice about teachers. Is it difficult to find a qualified teachers to do this?
Well, it was one of my main concerns when I was approached to add the program to my school. What I will say is we're in the process of interviewing right now for candidates, and with the help of the French Embassy and a lot of word of mouth and putting things on the internet, we have a number of very qualified candidates already who are going to be interviewing tomorrow. So.
Okay. Well, you know, bilingual education in the past has been much maligned for some groups have fought against it, saying that it sort of divide communities. What lessons have you learned from that battle and bringing it to this new project?
Right. I think the important thing to remember is that it's a dual language program, and we're stressing the importance of both French and English.
As opposed to in the past, what was the difference?
Well, there's a number of other programs. There's transitional bilingual instruction, which is for students who are new to the United States, who may speak very little to no English. And there's always been a debate, and it's still somewhat ongoing, as to whether it makes more sense to just immerse those students only in English or to give them a much larger percentage of their instruction in their native language. With a dual language program, we don't really face that challenge because, especially at the middle school level, the students who are coming in need to be proficient in French. They need to be able to read, write, and speak French at a certain level in order for us to let them in. We're not going to be able to take in students who speak no French with the expectation that 50% of their instruction will be in French.
Okay, so the students, how are you selecting the students?
For students who are coming from PS 84's French program, there's a seat available for them if they'd like it. For students who are coming from elsewhere in New York City, we have an application. There's a written piece where they have to write both in English and in French. There's a reading comprehension piece in English and French. And we interview the student and their family just to make sure that they're fluent and able to speak.
How many students are you looking to enroll in the fall?
I'm hoping that our first class will have approximately 22 to 26 students.
So very small.
Yeah, well, we couldn't go above 30 to begin with because that's our cap. But my philosophy is to try to keep classes as small as possible, because all the data shows that the smaller the class is, the more students learn. So.
And I know in Sarah's piece we watched earlier, it mentioned about the growth of the French community. What is sort of like the ultimate goal to grow this program?
Well, obviously we're going to add a year each year. So this coming year we'll only have 6th grade, and then each year we'll add a 6th grade class, and in 3 years we'll graduate our first 8th grade class. The goal would be to extend the program beyond my school and beyond middle school to high school. And I would say going even further, not just to be looking at only at French programs. I mean, this is New York City. There's so many different languages that are spoken, and I think there's a real desire from families and from parents for students who might only speak English at home and whose families only speak English, but to have that opportunity to start in kindergarten or 1st grade learning a second language concurrently with their native language. So I would say our overall goal for my school obviously is to run a successful French dual language program, but citywide, I believe the goal should be to create as many dual language programs as possible in the elementary schools, incubate them.
Is there a movement to do that?
Well, there's certainly an outcry, I would say, from the public. It was something I wasn't totally aware of until the Department of Education approached me about the possibility, but just seeing how active the French community is here in New York City and their desire to build this program, I would imagine that it's true for other communities as well.
And the French community has been growing rather steadily. Is there a chance that this can develop citywide, just a French dual program?
Absolutely. I would say that any elementary school that's interested in pursuing it, there are models now. I mean, there are 4 elementary schools that have done it successfully, and that's why there are 2 new middle school programs starting. I would say contact those principals, talk to the Department of Education. And one of the things I've discovered is it's not just limited to people who have a history or a background from France, the nation of France, but certainly we have students already
from
West Africa,
from
Haiti, yeah. So there's a larger community out there of French-speaking children.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey Pearl, and good luck with the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Independent Sources will be right back. That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Till next time, be independent-minded.